why do you think it's so hard for people to realize that overwhelmingly, especially in politics, there are no good guys? Like there is not like this, oh, this side is good and that side sucks. It's really not that way. I mean, we always say that corporate special interest capturing our government is the issue of our time. And if you're on the corporate dole, we're not supporting you, and I don't care who you stand with. If you're not on corporate money, then that is what we support. And I like to think most people would agree that that's probably the biggest issue that we face, and could definitely, really make a great effort to making sure that is the message that goes around and most can agree on.
I mean, nobody likes their politicians being controlled by special interests, but I would say that I kind of diverge on this issue a little bit, because like a lot of people think it's like you donate money, therefore you're buying the politician. But what I think actually happens is they find politicians that are already aligned with them and then support them. Because if you think about it, it's way easier to pay somebody who already agrees with you so that they can get attention and become successful than it is to pay somebody to change their position, especially if it's a fundamental position.
Yeah. Well, I think it's both. I think they get people. Well, I don't think they get anybody to change, but I think it's one, they get people that are going in the direction they're already going. And then there's people that'll go in whatever direction they're paid to go in. So there are people that are just fundamentally there. It's a job, and they're there to keep their job, and they like what they do, and they like the schmooze, and they like the power, and they'll go with whoever is the highest bidder. I think there's a lot of very bankrupt people that don't have positions one way or the other. And unfortunately, a lot of them are in Congress, I think. And there's a tribalism that is out of control and is not serving anybody at all. It's not serving regular people. The tribalism is just ridiculous. Like, there is no one tribe that I really completely agree with. So why would I subscribe to any one dogma when they're all bought by the same corporations? Like, how does that benefit? How does that benefit us?
I mean, I can understand that. I guess I read a book called The Dictator's Handbook recently, and I found it fascinating. I highly recommend it. And essentially the argument that's made by this book, and there's also a video series that breaks it down in 17 minutes, as if you could actually do that with an entire book, from CPG Gray. But it gives a pretty good summary, and it's what got me to want to read the book. And essentially, it makes the argument that the nature of power is that in order to hold a position of power, there are certain key interests that no matter what system you have, you're going to have to satisfy in order to maintain your position. And if you try to go against those key interests, then essentially you're going to be fighting against every single other person. And it's every politician, every dictator. It focuses on dictators for the first half of it, and then it expands it out to other forms of government. And essentially the case that is made by this book is that the only thing we could do to get better results because of the nature of power is just try to expand the coalition of people who can have influence rather than try to contract it. Because what they try to make, the argument they try to make is that the smaller coalition governments, which are typically dictators, essentially are the worst places to live on earth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm anti-authoritarian, so regardless of what form that takes. And I think that one of the biggest problems we have, that where we see the total failure of our education system, is the amount of people that name systems but don't know what they mean. So they're socialist or communist or fascist, or everyone's very quick to pull out labels, but they don't really know what it means, and they conflate governments with economic systems. And it's sort of like this complete ignorance in how this works. So when you have both sides of people that would agree, we're not in favor of authoritarianism, but that doesn't mean we agree on the exact way that our economics should be. And I think that that's the kind of thing where we can see agreement, where Peter usually refers to it as libertarians and progressives, but it's like where I am very pro-civil liberties. Across the board, all of them. I'm very big into the Constitution. It matters very much to me. But I do believe in social safety net, right? So, but there are definitely fundamental things that we agree on that are not relevant to partisan politics. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah,
for sure. And that's 100% the case. And unfortunately, there's separated from partisan politics, agreement on we should have less Fourth Amendment protections, or we should maybe sometimes you don't get a lawyer in this situation, or things like that. So yeah, there are things that transcend partisanship, which is good to acknowledge them and all that. But the question I'm asking is like fundamentally, like I get the drive to get money out of politics, but if there's certain power brokers that exist like under any system, and that is absent like literal campaign donations, then like it is getting money out of politics like the, is it this like, is it what all it's cracked up to be, if that makes sense?
I think it would be like let's just assume, just for argument's sake, that we over the next few sessions got enough non-corporate people into Congress that they were able to change the legislation to enact publicly funded elections and get all private money out of elections. So everybody, it's like high school, everyone gets a certain amount of money and everyone gets a certain amount of airtime. And we were able to do that, like in theory. Yeah, I think it would make a huge difference. I think that if people couldn't buy Congress people, that would change a lot of things. I think it would change policy almost overnight from when we would get rid of the money. And I think it would put a lot more faith in our electoral system that would encourage more people to participate. It would allow for more people to run for office that aren't millionaires. So yes, but how long do we have to get enough people in office to make that happen? That's the problem. And in the meantime, we need to show up to a gunfight with a gun. And unfortunately, Democrats usually show up to a gunfight with spoon. And so, there's got to be, you got to just fight bad money with good money at this point. But I'd rather there be no money there.
And I think a good example of that, if you're talking about the political right, ironically, is, universally, I think from Jen and our perspective, the worst elected Republican in the country is Mitch McConnell. But interestingly enough, probably the two best Republicans elected in the country right now are also from Kentucky, Rand Paul in the Senate and Thomas Massie in the House. And the reason I bring them up isn't because I agree with them. It's because they're not bought and paid for by corporate power. They actually think for themselves. They are very libertarian in their belief system. They rarely, if ever, deviate from it. And whether you agree with it or not, you at least have to respect the fact that when it comes to the issues at bar, you know where they're going to be. You know that they're not going to, just be caving to whatever like the evangelical right wants or anything like that. And they're willing to take the heat, especially Massie. I mean, credit to him for, at least willing to be a political punching bag. And the person on the left that, I think we both agree is probably the best representation in Congress right now would be Katie Porter. I know a lot of people get really caught up with what the squad does, but to me, I cannot stand the political theater. I think it's a waste of time. It only divides us. It only, people have brands. It will be just as critical of the things that AOC does as just as much as what Candace Owens will do. So that type of stuff is not what I think is going to allow us to find common ground on the major issues, whether it is, like I said, education, healthcare, living wage, and obviously the environment and the wars. And so to me, I do think that there are good reps. The problem is when you have 535 and only like maybe 25 of them are good, that's kind of bad. Like it really bad.
Well, okay. So, again, I don't disagree that obviously money influences politics. And by the way, the way that you get high ranking in Congress, like Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House, and I forgot the majority whip leader. I forgot what they're precisely called. Yeah. So the way you get to those positions is you raise the most money for the party. Yeah. So there's definitely a pay to play element of that 100%. It's undeniable. That being said, the reason, like one of the biggest turning points in the Democratic primary in 2020 for Joe Biden's campaign was a Jim Clyburn endorsement. And the way that he endorsed Biden was unbelievable for Joe Biden. He was given an award by, I think it was Al Sharpton's group, that was named for his late wife. So in his endorsement, when he was like tearing up because it was a surprise for him, he talked about Biden's friendship with his late wife. Now, Clyburn has influence that he's built up over time, political currency, specifically in South Carolina, which was where Biden turned his whole campaign around. If you just target money in politics, then it's still going to benefit people that are like already connected with established interests. Like, and to separate it from Clyburn for a second, because that's one guy, and you could say he's earned that over time, so he's allowed to endorse whoever he wants. The thing that I worry about is that if you were to get rid of if you were to get rid of a lot of people hate super PACs, right? But in reality, super PACs, what they are people spending money telling you their opinion about politics. Like if a super PAC was a corporation called a media company, people would be totally fine with it. So if you get rid of super PACs, which are trying to use money to counterbalance the effect of media, then all we're really left with is large corporate media with even greater influence, because you kind of knocked out their competition. And I know we like to see it in like a linear way where we're like, oh, well, in these cases, the media was aligned with the super PACs. So it's like a double whammy if you're on the other side of that issue. But if you were to be someone like a Bernie Sanders, who's being funded largely like by small donations, and I think he asked people not to donate to a super PAC, like he didn't have one that was connected to him, even though they're all technically not connected to the candidates. But the fact that he got all that money, and that, yes, he had his passionate supporters and all that, allowed him to push back against the media to get where he was in the first place. So like if you remove that, I worry that you end up in a situation where more like basically the established interests have more power, not less.
Well, I think the perfect example of why, the corporate money is such a problem is in the state of Florida, where we are. You're talking about an energy monopoly in Florida Power and Light, which is owned by NextEra Energy, which is one of the biggest financial donors in the energy sector. And they can outraise anybody hand over fist. Outside of private insurance and big pharma, nobody lobbies Capitol Hill more than they do. The big difference, of course, what we face right now is we don't actually need for-profit middlemen in between us and our doctors when it comes to healthcare, but we are still dependent on fossil fuels. And as a result of that, we're not in a situation where we could properly transition. We could absolutely make amazing use of solar here in Florida. There is so much protected land where it would work. Unfortunately, when big oil has such a stranglehold and so much money, and they buy up both parties, while everyone is focusing on the Don't Say Gay bill, they shoved down an anti-solar bill that took 3 Democratic senators to pass because 3 GOP senators said, no, this isn't good for our constituents here in the Panhandle. So in the most conservative part of Florida, they voted against it. But sure enough, they got 3 Democratic senators to come along and, get that bill through, which is screwing us, the taxpayers. And it's also hurting the environment. So that's where I think is a prime example of where the corporate money in politics really becomes a problem. Because if they want any candidate, and it's not a question of, well, how do you know this person's going to take the money and it's just going to, do exactly what the corporations say? They only need a few of them to really do it. And when the margins are so narrow, you just got to pick off the ones that are going to do what they're going to do. And without naming any names, when you have people who just want to point the finger at DeSantis and say that he's the problem, even though this guy is already, and Jen and I have been saying this for over a year, Sean, he is the next president if he's able to build up enough momentum against Trump in the primary. I do believe that as of this moment. And so while everybody's just pointing the finger at him, it's like, but that it can't get to DeSantis unless these others are willing actors in the process. And so that to me is one of the biggest problems with this whole entrenched corruption within the system that Jen and I are vehemently against. And if you know anything about Debbie Wasserman Schultz, it's on steroids down here in South Florida.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.